Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Indian Law Resource Center with the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, the Haliwa Saponi Tribe, the Métis Nation, and the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, we thank you for this opportunity to comment on the standards for accrediting Indigenous governing institutions to participate at the UN. While the accreditation body or committee that was discussed this morning should be responsible for further elaborating standards and procedures for accreditation, we want to offer some initial thoughts and guidance as to what could be a preliminary set of criteria for considering applications. Indigenous governing institutions, we feel, should be accredited if they demonstrate three factors. One, that they represent a people. Two, that the people is in fact indigenous. And three, that the government is duly established by the people. The first requirement is that the government represent a people. That is, a people distinct from others and having shared bonds of history, language, culture, ethnicity, location, self-government, and other social or political bonds. Second, the people must be shown to be indigenous, as that term is used in practice and understood in the United Nations and other international intergovernmental bodies, such as the International Labor Organization, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and as discussed in the Martinez-Cobo study. Some common elements of these sources that are used to identify indigenous peoples include descent from a people existing prior to the development of the present state or prior to conquest or colonization, connection to an ancestral territory, having distinct social, economic, cultural, and political institutions, and self-identification as a distinct people. These are elements that are well known within the UN system and have developed over the past 30 years. The people must not be ethnic, national, linguistic, racial, or any other group that is not in fact indigenous. This is a question of fact and a question of history, and it cannot be determined by self-identification alone, but no particular definition should be required. The third requirement is that the government be duly established by the indigenous people that it purports to represent. Naturally, such a government must be democratic in nature as well as representative of and responsible and accountable to the people. No particular form of government should be required, and the accreditation standards should remain flexible to allow further development through practice. Initially, an applicant could be requested to provide documentation or other reliable evidence establishing their existence as a governing institution. Documentation could include written or oral testimony or statements. Each applicant should, for example, briefly describe the people, the indigenous nation, or the community that it represents, the governing powers or decision-making authority that it exercises, and the principal officials or office holders in the government. The accrediting body should consider evidence and views from all relevant sources and give due consideration to recognition of the applicant by the relevant state or states and by other indigenous peoples, though this alone cannot be the determining factor. Whatever accreditation standards are decided upon, they must be strong but flexible and also responsive to the differences among indigenous governing institutions around the world. A government that meets these requirements and other related requirements should be accredited to participate permanently, subject to periodic reporting on a reasonable basis, and the accredited government would then designate the individuals that would represent it in particular UN meetings. Giving sufficient consideration to each of these factors during the process for accreditation will assure that applicants are in fact indigenous and are genuine and duly chosen representatives of the people and governing institution they represent. And it will assure that indigenous leaders are always at the UN to directly assert and defend their rights. Thank you.